Welcome, learners, to another deep dive. Today, we're embarking on a journey through a really foundational and incredibly dynamic area of nursing, perioperative and emergency care.
That sounds like a big topic.
It is. Think of it as kind of a roadmap for ensuring patient safety and, optimal outcomes.
Right.
Starting from the moment surgery is even a thought, through the procedure itself, into recovery. And then even stretching into those unpredictable emergency situations.
That's right. And our mission for this deep dive is really to synthesize the most critical concepts from a key section of Lewis's medical surgical nursing.
Okay.
We're aiming to turn that complex info into clear, actionable insights for you, focusing on those core medical surgical concepts that, well, college nursing students really need to get. We'll connect the dots across these different phases of care, highlighting, shared challenges, essential assessment strategies, priority interventions, always emphasizing the nursing process, critical thinking, and collaboration.
It's about building that holistic understanding, isn't it? The kind that serves you well in actual practice, not just on an exam.
Exactly, not just theory.
I love that phrase, holistic understanding,
Yeah.
because sometimes it feels like we're just, checking boxes.
Right.
But understanding the why behind those checks, that's everything. So let's unpack our first phase, preoperative care.
Okay.
This is where the whole surgical journey kicks off. And it's way more than just signing a few forms. People have surgery for lots of reasons, right?
Huh.
Diagnosis, like a biopsy.
Or cure, like taking out a ruptured appendix. Palliation to maybe reducing pain without a cure.
Prevention, like removing a mole before it turns malignant.
Cosmetic improvement, even exploration, though maybe less common now with better diagnostics.
So what's the real nursing insight here, beyond just knowing the reasons?
What's truly fascinating, I think, is how a single patient's surgery can touch on multiple reasons. That preventative mole removal, it might also be cosmetic, sure, but for a cancer survivor, maybe it's a profound act of self-care against recurrence. Recognizing that multi-layered perspective, it completely changes your approach.
That makes sense. And the setting's changed too, hasn't it?
Oh, absolutely. While some procedures are still inpatient, most are now ambulatory or SAM-day surgery, often minimally invasive.
Which means faster recovery.
Faster recovery, yes, but it also puts a huge emphasis on thorough preoperative assessment and patient education before they even walk in the door, because they're not staying overnight.
Right, so a lot shifts to that pre-op phase.
Yeah.
So when a nurse sits down for that initial interview, beyond the basic medical history, what's maybe the most challenging or easily overlooked bit of info we need?
Well, a critical and often sensitive area is the psychosocial assessment. Surgery, even something minor, is a massive stressor. Patients often fear death, permanent disability, pain, changes in body image, even from a tiny scar, and, the unknown stuff about anesthesia.
So thinking like an NCLEX question, imagine an 18-year-old, renal mass biopsy. Surgery gets delayed 4 hours. She's super anxious and asks for a strong pill. What do you do?
Right. Our role isn't just to jump to medication, it's assessing those stressors, maybe alleviating anxiety with other things, like music research actually supports that.
Interesting.
Supporting their hope, but also digging into the root of that anxiety and educating her on the risks versus benefits. And speaking of sensitive topics, meds.
Oh, yeah.
We have to review all medications, prescription, OTC, and especially herbs. So many patients don't think of herbs as drugs.
But they can cause huge problems, right? Like with bleeding.
Exactly. Things like St. John's wort or ginkgo can have major interactions, particularly with anticoagulants, can lead to dangerous postoperative bleeding. We also need to identify cultural factors, like if a patient is a Jehovah's Witness and might decline blood products. That needs clear communication.
That psychosocial piece, that's where the real art of nursing comes in, isn't it? It's not just what they say.
It's what they don't say sometimes. And getting true informed consent is a huge part of that advocacy role.
Right. The surgeon explains the procedure, risks, benefits, alternatives.
Yeah.
But what's the nurse's specific job in that moment?
Our specific job is patient advocacy. We verify there was adequate disclosure diagnosis, purpose, risks, alternatives, and crucially, we ensure the patient has clear understanding before any sedation is given.
Before sedation. Key point.
Because what if they sign the form, but then on the way to the OR, they say, wait, I'm not sure what they're doing.
They have to stop.
You must contact the surgeon. Consent can be withdrawn anytime. Now, in a true life-saving emergency, consent can sometimes be overridden, but that's a very specific, rare, legal and ethical situation.
Okay, so all that meticulous prep is done. The patient's ready for the OR. This is where the surgical team becomes like an orchestra, right?
Yeah.
Let's talk intraoperative care. The OR itself, it's super controlled.
Oh, absolutely. The surgery department is divided into 3 distinct zones. You've got the unrestricted area where street clothes are okay. Then semi-restricted needs surgical attire, head covers, shoe covers.
Okay.
And finally, the restricted zone. That's the OR itself and the sterile core. Masks are mandatory there too. It's all designed to minimize pathogen spread, keep things flowing smoothly, maintain sterility. It's like a careful dance.
Speaking of dancing,
Yeah.
the surgical team, lots of players. Who are the key ones, and maybe what's the most critical role a new nursing student should really grasp for safety in there?
Good question. The perioperative nurse is the patient's main advocate during surgery. This includes the circulating nurse.
Okay, the circulator.
Right. They manage the unsterile field, document everything, coordinate, ensure safety, including those crucial counts of sponges, needles, instruments.
Yeah.
Then there's the scrub nurse, working in the sterile field, handing instruments, assisting the surgeon. You've also got the surgeon, assistants, and the anesthesia care provider, or ACP, could be an anesthesiologist or a CRNA. They manage anesthesia, fluids, airway.
It's a real team effort. If you had to pick one role for a student to focus on for safety.
I'd probably say the circulating nurse. Their role in overall patient advocacy and ensuring those critical safety checks happen is just paramount, like the surgical timeout.
Ah, yes, the timeout.
Before that first incision, the entire team stops. Verifies patient identity, the procedure, the surgical site. It's part of the universal protocol. Prevents never events like wrong site surgery. It's absolutely non-negotiable. Everyone's responsible in that moment.
That's such a vital check. It feels like the surgeon's the leader, but the nurse is that constant patient guardian. Okay, let's shift to a critical crisis. Malignant hyperthermia, MH. What is it, and what are the earliest signs a nurse needs to catch?
MH is rare, thankfully, but it's an inherited muscle metabolism disorder, triggered by certain general anesthetics like acetylcholine or inhaled agents, and it's life-threatening.
Scary stuff.
It is. Now, the classic sign everyone thinks of is a rapid rise in body temp, but interestingly, that's often not an early sign.
Really? What is then?
The crucial early signs are often things like tachycardia, a really fast heart rate, and hypercarbia. That's a high level of CO2 in the blood, signaling a metabolic crisis in the muscles.
Yeah.
You might also see severe muscle rigidity.
Okay, so NCLEX thinking again. During surgery, the ACP notices end tidal, CO2 climbing, O2 consumption up, heart rate rising.
Yeah.
What's the immediate thought and action?
Immediate suspicion has to be MH, the priority. Turn off those triggering agents now. Administer dantrolene, that's the specific antidote, and start active cooling. Nurses are absolutely critical in recognizing this early and helping coordinate that rapid response.
Wow, really drives home how vigilant you have to be. Okay, surgery's over. Now, the critical phase of postoperative care, usually starting in the PACU, the post-anesthesia care unit, what's the absolute #1 priority when that patient rolls in?
Always. Always. ABCs, airway, breathing, circulation, it is foundational.
Okay, ABCs.
Immediately assess for airway obstruction. Often it's just the tongue falling back, especially if they're still groggy. Look for hypoxemia, low O2 sat. That might show up as agitation or sometimes sleepiness. And hypoventilation, slow, shallow breathing. We're using pulse oximetry, maybe capnography, even acoustic monitoring sometimes.
In circulation.
Yep, monitor ECG, blood pressure, temperature, cap refill, skin condition. Neurologic assessment too, level of consciousness, orientation, pupils. And remember, hearing's often the first sense back.
Good tip. Now, respiratory complications, often called the biggest post-op risk. Why are they so common, and what's one key intervention a nurse can teach that really makes a difference?
You hit a critical point there. They are the biggest risk. Often it's the lingering effects of anesthesia depressing the respiratory drive, or maybe mucus plugs blocking small airways, leading to atelectasis.
Collapsed alveoli, right?
Exactly, and that can easily progress to pneumonia if you're not careful. Probably the most impactful intervention we teach is consistent use of the incentive spirometer.
That little plastic device.
That little device, plus deep breathing and coughing exercises. Simple, but so powerful. And positioning helps too. Conscious patients, usually head elevated, unconscious ones in that lateral recovery position to prevent aspiration. Splinting the incision when coughing is key too.
Makes sense. Okay, beyond breathing, pain. always a huge concern. For the patient, for recovery, how do nurses manage post-op pain effectively, especially now with the focus on minimizing opioids?
Yeah, pain is a big fear for patients, and it's complicated, comes from the incision, muscle spasms, anxiety, even how they were positioned during surgery.
Right.
We use pain scales, of course, numeric faces, but we also have to watch nonverbal cues, especially if someone can't easily tell us their pain level. The approach now is often multimodal analgesia,
Multimodal, meaning
combining different types of pain relief. So maybe smaller doses of opioids combined with non-opioids like NSAIDs or acetaminophen. This helps reduce opioid dependence and those nasty side
the
effects.
constipation and drowsiness,
Exactly. We also use patient-controlled analgesia or PCA pumps.
where they push the button themselves.
Right, gives them a sense of control. And sometimes epidural analgesia or perineural local anesthesia for continuous relief near the surgical site. But a huge safety alert here. PCA pumps need super careful programming. Errors are considered never events.
Yeah. Double, triple checks needed there.
Yeah.
That focus on multimodal and patient empowerment seems really key. So as patients get ready for discharge, especially same-day surgery folks, what's the absolute most crucial thing we need to ensure they and their caregivers understand before walking out?
It's making sure they truly get the discharge instructions. It's not enough to just hand them a piece of paper.
Right.
We need to use the teach-back method, ask them to explain the instructions back to us in their own words.
Okay.
That confirms they understand medication schedules, wound care, activity restrictions, and this is critical to signs and symptoms they need to report immediately, like increasing pain, redness, swelling at the site.
Got it.
And for older adults, even more vital. They're more prone to complications like pneumonia, heart issues, post-op delirium. They metabolize drugs slower, might have cognitive issues affecting recall, and they absolutely need a responsible adult to drive them home and help out.
That teach-back method, invaluable. Puts the burden on us as educators to make sure they understand. Okay, let's pivot. A completely different world now. Emergency and disaster nursing.
Yeah.
The ED, often called controlled chaos. But nurses bring the structure, right?
Absolutely. The core challenge, recognizing life-threatening illness or injury and acting fast, often before you even have a definite diagnosis. It all starts with triage.
Sorting patients.
Exactly. Rapidly figuring out patient acuity. We usually use the 5-level Emergency Severity Index, or ESI. The whole point is identifying threats to life or limb immediately, making sure those patients get treated first. Chest pain suggesting ischemia. High ESI, simple cold symptoms, much lower.
Okay, so once they're triaged, if it's serious, what's the systematic, like rapid-fire assessment for those immediate threats?
We use the primary survey. Focuses only on immediate life threats. The mnemonic is CBCDE.
CABCDE. What's the C?
The C is newish, stands for catastrophic hemorrhage. If there's massive external bleeding, you control that first. Direct pressure.
Okay, stop the bleed first, then ABCDE.
Yep. Airway, always thinking about cervical spine stabilization if there's trauma. Breathing, assess ventilation, slap on 100% O2. Circulation, check pulses. Control any other bleeding. Start 2 large bore IVs for fluids. Disability, quick neuro check using Glasgow Coma Scale, or even faster, AVPU. Alert, response to voice, response to pain, or unresponsive.
AVPU.
Right, and exposure. Remove clothing to see everything, but prevent hypothermia, get warm blankets on them. And here's the key. You intervene immediately as you find problems in the primary survey. It's not just assess, then treat. It's assess, intervene, assess, intervene.
Like rapid damage control. Okay, once those immediate fires are out, or at least managed, then you do a more detailed look.
Exactly. Then comes the secondary survey. More detailed head-to-toe assessment and history. We use MIST for the pre-hospital report. Mechanism of injury, injury sustained, signs and symptoms, treatment given before arrival, and we use sample for the patient history.
Sample, symptoms, allergies.
Medications, past history, last meal, and events environment leading up to this. Then a thorough physical exam. Head, neck, face, looking for things like battle sign or raccoon eyes indicating skull fracture. Chest, abdomen, and maybe using a fast scan.
Focused abdominal sonography for trauma.
Right, looking for internal bleeding in blunt trauma. Pelvis, extremities, checking for pulses, movement, sensation, and looking out for compartment syndrome. That's where swelling inside a muscle compartment cuts off blood flow, can cause permanent damage if missed.
Nasty.
And throughout all this constant reevaluation, we use VIPP, vital signs, injuries reassessed, primary survey repeated, pain assessment, because things change fast in the ED.
Absolutely. Now, thinking bigger picture. Math casualty incidents, MCIs,
Mm.
sadly something nurses have to prepare for. How does the approach change when resources are just totally overwhelmed?
Yeah, in an MCI, the fundamental goal shifts. It's no longer about doing everything possible for every patient. Resources are overwhelmed. The goal becomes doing the greatest good for the greatest number of people.
A tough shift.
It is. We use different triage systems, often colored tags: green for minor, walking wounded; yellow for delayed but stable; red for immediate life-threatening injuries that are potentially salvageable; and black for deceased or injuries so severe they're unlikely to survive given the limited resources. It's a harsh ethical framework, but necessary.
Uh-huh.
Nurses need training to recognize and respond to different types of events, too: biologic, like anthrax; chemical, like sarin gas, nuclear explosives; hospital disaster plans; community response teams. They're all essential.
Hmm.
And we can't forget the immense stress on responders. Critical incident stress management is vital for the teams, too. We also need to be aware of violence in the ED, screening for family and intimate partner violence, even human trafficking. Sexual assault nurse examiners play a crucial role there, too.
What an incredible deep dive, covering so much ground. From the meticulous planning of pre-op, the precision in the OR, vigilant recovery post-op, to the rapid adaptable response in emergencies and disasters.
It really does highlight how interconnected nursing is, doesn't it? Each phase builds on the last. And those core principles: assessment, critical thinking, patient safety, advocacy, they're the constant threads running through everything. You see those patterns across all these different scenarios.
Absolutely. So as you, our listeners, continue your studies, prepping for your careers, maybe think about this. How does understanding this whole spectrum of care empower you? Not just as a caregiver doing tasks, but as a critical thinker, an advocate, someone constantly adapting to protect and heal in all these demanding, diverse, and ultimately really rewarding situations.
That's a great thought to end on. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep learning, keep asking those questions, keep building that comprehensive understanding.
We'll catch you on the next one.